I want, Bruce, briefly today to touch on a number of key issues in education, tell you how things are moving forward and what we are trying to do. But the first thing I want to stress is the basic Scottish principles and virtues in the education system. I believe very strongly that our education system is founded on two words, on the words access and the word excellence. And we should bring together in our education those two things and never forget them. We were the first country in the world to introduce universal access to education, the first country that established a system and network of parish schools. And it's something that has served us well over hundreds of years. So when my predecessor re-established the principle of free education in Scotland, she was doing not just what this party pledged to do, she was doing what generation upon generation of Scots regarded as needed to happen to make education work in Scotland. So we've re-established free education, and particularly in higher and further education. And when I spoke to the National Union of Students conference just 2 weeks ago, I re-emphasised that, and I want to do it quite publicly here again today. While the SNP is in government, it will never introduce student top-up fees in Scotland. So that gives us challenges. We've got to develop a uniquely Scottish solution. We've got to have a solution that makes sure we can continue to invest in our higher and further education sectors, but we're doing our very best. Even as Westminster cuts the Scottish Government budget by $500 million, even while Labour is cutting university budgets in England next year, we're increasing university and college budgets. And while Labour are cutting 6,000 places in England, we're increasing places by 7,000. It's hard to create that space, but we've got to do it partly because of the brown bust and partly because we owe it to every single young person in Scotland to invest in their future and to help them forward. And we've got that view too in our schools in Scotland. Sometimes a lot of rubbish is talked about Scotland's schools, and let's start with that. In Scotland, the truth is that every single day there are hundreds of thousands of good pupils being taught by tens of thousands of good teachers in thousands of good schools. There is much that is excellent in our system and will continue to be excellent. But where there are things that don't work, where there are problems, then we have to have the courage to confront them and the imagination to find the solutions. And that's what we're trying to do. And trying to do it in a globally competitive world, trying to do it where others are recognising their problems and trying to find solutions too. Scottish education is good. Often it's very good. But sometimes it's not quite as good as it could be. And our job as an SNP administration is to look that in the face, to be honest about it, and then to find the solutions. And we're making progress. Class sizes in an area where we're making progress. In Scotland today, we have the smallest class sizes that we've ever had, and that is an achievement by an SNP government. But we haven't gone far enough in the key area, which is the class sizes in primaries 1, 2 and 3. But even so, we're doing spectacularly better than any of our predecessors. And year on year, we're going to keep building that. And I pay tribute to the work of the vast majority of Scotland's councils, who have recognised that as an important priority, who are now working with us to make progress. And we will make that progress year on year. And we'll see the difference. And that's one of the big problems in education, one of the big challenges in education. If we invest now, we won't see the difference in a year's time or in 2 years' time. We'll see the difference in a generation or 2 generations. So we have to keep our nerve, we have to decide what is right, and we have to pursue it with vigour. And the best way, perhaps, to do that is through consensus. Bruce mentioned the issue of consensus because I think it's important. I've just come back from a trip to Finland and Sweden to look at their educational models. And while there are lots of talk about what works and what doesn't work, the most striking thing I saw was in Finland. And the most striking thing is that over 30 years they have built an educational consensus, a political consensus, about what's important in education. And that's allowed them to concentrate on building the trust of Finnish society in their schools and how they deliver, and investing in their teachers. And what they have there is the best performing education system in Europe. And I reckon we should think long and hard about how we do that. It'll require compromise on all our parts. It'll require abilities to work together that we've not yet found. It'll require us to regard our young people as being more important than a soundbite or a headline. But if we could achieve that, if we could take that forward, then the whole of Scotland, in a generation or 2 generations, would find itself transformed. So whilst I will continue to argue for what I believe is absolutely right, I will also argue for the ability to have that national debate, to take it forward and to succeed with it. And we have, Bruce, in our policy at the moment, an interesting example of how we might succeed with that. Curriculum for excellence. Again, we've heard quite a lot of nonsense about curriculum for excellence. Because the reality about curriculum for excellence is that it's not something that's bolted or added on. It's how we deliver education. It's how we're going to deliver education in the modern world. It's how we're already doing it in our primary schools and how we're increasingly doing it in our secondary schools. And curriculum for excellence is a world-beating system. It's what other people are beginning to do, and we're slightly ahead of them. And it arose out of a consensus within the Parliament's Education Committee in the first term and through a consensus in the Parliament in the second term. So I'm going to drive forward with curriculum for excellence. I'm listening to teachers, I'm listening to unions, I'll listen to the management board. But what that's about is making Scotland's education fit for the 21st century. And if we can have that achieved well by consensus, then it will do great things for this country. Now, Bruce, I want to finish with a positive and a negative. And here's the negative. In 2000, in the year 2000, I became the opposition spokesperson on education. And at that time, there was a great debate about PFI and PPP, and we were being told that it would produce miracles for Scotland. And I remember, along with my colleagues in that first Parliament, arguing that this was a poison chalice. You might get a bright, shiny building in some places, but you'd get that far better if you followed the conventional procurement routes, because what you were doing was mortgaging your future. And we were pooh-poohed. People wouldn't listen to us. They thought it was nonsense. Well, let me give you the latest figures, which I released today. And these are the figures. In the last 12 months, the cost of PPP has increased by £62 million. Education budgets, those precious education revenue budgets, out of which there is resource for schools, those precious budgets, because PPP comes out of revenue budgets, those revenue budgets are already being hit by a charge of £244 million, and it's rising remorselessly year on year. There is one council in Scotland that's already paying £1 in every 10 in its education budget just for PPP profit. Now, that's a real problem. And when I hear people within the Labour Party or elsewhere criticising the allocation of funding to education, which we have increased, which we are increasing, then I ask them to remember this. The problems that exist are created in many councils by their foolish and flawed decisions. And those foolish and flawed decisions have mortgaged our children's future. It is a problem. It's a problem they've made. It's a problem we're going to have to sort out.